Weekend calm, but no rest for the rescuers. A Saturday morning brings an eerie quiet to the city that never sleeps.
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
A battle cry from the president as he focuses on America's new war. Good morning. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America under attack. I'm Paula Zahn reporting from New York this morning. With us this morning, Bill Hemmer, who is also in the city. He happens to be on the lower streets of Manhattan, below 14th Street. John King joins us from Washington this morning. And Miles O'Brien will be with us from Atlanta all morning long. We begin now with the latest developments on America's new war. Congress has approved a resolution authorizing President Bush to use force against those responsible for this week's terrorist attacks. Lawmakers also approved $40 billion to finance a war against terrorists and to clean up and rebuild the damage from Tuesday's attacks. In Pennsylvania, they have found the cockpit voice recorder from United Airlines Flight 93. It was sent to the NTSB for analysis. Authorities hope it will reveal what the hijackers intended to do and what happened in the final minutes of that fatal flight. Meanwhile, two men the INS took into custody in Texas are on their way to New York for more questioning. Sources tell CNN this morning the two men have detailed knowledge of the multiple terrorist attacks and are moving the investigation forward. I'm going to show you a shot right now of what exactly is going on in New York City. The pace of the rescue and cleanup efforts has increased now that the rain has moved out of the area. It is cold here this morning, and World Trade Center rescue workers are rummaging through, you can't see it in this picture, but rummaging through boxes of clothing from the Salvation Army in search of warmer gear because of temperatures in the mid-50s today, maybe getting as high as the 60s. Tonight it's supposed to dip into the 40s. Although no one has been pulled alive from the twisted heaps of steel and glass and concrete since Wednesday, rescue workers are toiling 24-hour shifts in search for any signs of life. We know among the confirmed dead are 13 city firefighters. In fact, those numbers have gone up dramatically since then. I have another note here saying city officials are saying as many as 400 city firefighters are dead. They believe over 4,700 people are missing. And probably one of the biggest challenges for New Yorkers right now, particularly those families in limbo, is to go through the painstaking process of moving from hospital to hospital to try to track down loved ones. Many of them not aware if their family members ever made it out of the World Trade Center after the initial blast. And right now, Kate Snow gives us a very good idea of what this process is like when you're trying to track down a loved one.
Time back.
Obviously that package is not ready right now. So we're going to check in with Bill Hemmer, who joins us from the Jacobs Javits Center. Bill, I heard an interesting thing on my way into work. I am told that there are so many professional contractors on duty now that many of the volunteers who have lined up for many, many hours to pitch in are being turned away. Are you finding it down there?
In fact, just a few moments ago, there was an announcement made here, Paul, that indeed said that very thing, that the hundreds and hundreds of people, and we showed up here about an hour and a half ago. The line starts here at the convention center.
Yes.
Right now we're on Manhattan's west side. It snakes down along the block and clear around the way here. There must be upwards of 1,000 volunteers who have come here this morning trying to get on buses to be shuttled down. But moments ago, we were just told that steam fitters and iron workers are the only two groups of people they're looking for right now. We're not sure exactly why, but what we were told earlier, we were given an indication that there are a number of volunteers already on the site, and they're pretty much overloaded at this point. I want to bring in Anthony Pisano in here from Staten Island. Anthony, you were just over the convention center area here when they made an announcement. What did they say?
Yes, from what I overheard, they didn't actually speak to me directly, but what I overheard is that they want to get all the professional policemen, firemen, EMT, anybody in the medical emergency service and people in the medical
Any chance
profession.
you'll get in today or
No,
not?
not today, but I did get in yesterday with my local and my representatives there. We went in as a group to help out.
I want you to hang out here a second. We're going to get your story in a moment. First, though,
All right.
Paula, I'm going to go down to the White House and CNN's John King. Let's check in there now. John?
Well, Bill, standing by at another location at our CNN bureau here in Washington, monitoring developments at the White House and across the city. Obviously, a very important time for President Bush. He is up at the Camp David presidential retreat. Vice President Dick Cheney up there as well. The president, we are told, already awake and at work this morning, awaiting his signature. Legislation quickly passed by the Congress authorizing up to $40 billion, the initial down payment for the recovery efforts, also for the increased military operations because of this horrific tragedy. The president yesterday, of course, was up in New York City, also led the nation in prayer as he tries to adopt the role of consoling the nation and delivering a pep talk to those relief workers. Look for a continuation today. He will deliver his weekly radio address. More importantly, though, aides say the president will meet with his national security team up at Camp David. Increasingly, those discussions, we are told by senior administration sources, turning to potential military options, both short-term and long-term. So a very important weekend here for the president. Again, he is gratified by the bipartisan support in Congress, not only for that spending proposal, but also for a resolution authorizing him to use necessary and appropriate force once he decides to retaliate for this. The president meeting with his national security staff this morning. Once again, he will address the nation as well. One of the president's challenges, we are told, he told aides after shaking hands with all those relief workers yesterday, he was surprised by the anger. So many workers told him they wanted him to retaliate. The president, as he mulls his option, urging the American people to be patient. Paula?
John, what is the strategy for what appearances the president might make in the days to come?
Well, we certainly saw an evolution over the week. If you remember, right after the attacks, there was even a debate about why it took so long to get the president back to Washington from Florida. At first, his role was in a consoling one, trying to convince the American people their government was back at work. Much more stern language in recent days as the president has promised to retaliate for this. At the same time, though, urging the American people to give him patience, the investigators' patience. The president now has a dual role, one to plan what we are told will be a sustained military and diplomatic campaign. So as he tries to have the American people on the one hand be patient and wait for a retaliation, at the same time he's trying to build public support for an operation his aides say will not take days, will not take weeks, not even months, that will go on for the rest of the Bush term. So the president, a very delicate challenge here. On the one hand, he has to step up and lead the nation, console it in this moment of grief. On the other, plan for a military response that his aides insist will be unprecedented in scope.
John, what is the consensus you're getting there if and when the sustained campaign happens? Is there any hope that the United States or its allies, any of the folks involved in this coalition they're trying to cobble together, will ever find Osama bin Laden?
Well, that is a difficult question.
We need to make it clear, we need to make it clear it is Secretary of State Colin Powell, of course, who has called Osama bin Laden a prime suspect.
He has, and the president himself last night said we have a suspect. Aides rushed after that to say don't rush to conclusions. There could be more than one suspect. That is one of the problems here. In the short term, the president knows there is palpable anger across the country. The American people want something done, want retaliation for this. At the same time, if there is to be an international coalition that can stay together for several years, the president is talking not only about a military operation, but an international coalition to crack down on financial support, not only for bin Laden, but for other terrorist groups, to crack down and put diplomatic and financial pressure on states that harbor terrorists. If there is to be support for that, the president is going to have to show not only the U.S. allies, but countries that are less predictable, like China, like Russia, that there is credible evidence that whether it is Mr. bin Laden, whoever the United States goes after, he's going to have to show there's credible evidence to keep that international coalition together. So a very tough challenge for the president. Top advisors do not rule out some retaliatory strikes in the near future. Some say even possible within the next several days. Others think it might be a week or two or more. But what they say is most important is that the president build support not only here in the United States, but around the world for, again, what they keep describing as an unprecedented effort. And remember, we went after Mr. bin Laden. The United States went after Mr. bin Laden back in the Clinton administration. 75 cruise missiles launched on Afghanistan and one target in the Sudan. Mr. bin Laden still in operation. That a lesson to the Bush administration that things need to be done differently this time.
John, one last question for you. There was a front page story in the New York Times talking about the amount of pressure that the United States government is putting on individual Arab governments right now to cooperate. Can you shed some light on that for us this morning?
Certainly can. Our understanding is that President Bush, Secretary of State Powell, and all other administration officials, including ambassadors around the world, have been giving orders to go to see their counterparts in allied countries like Canada, like Britain, like Germany, but also in Arab nations like Saudi Arabia, like Jordan and Egypt. Essentially, the administration's message is you're either with us or you're against us. Very blunt talk, we are told, not the usual diplomatic language about could you help us, but the president, in one example I'm told, he told the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, we need you to crack down on bin Laden. We need you to cut off financial support. We need you to take a tougher line against the Taliban. Secretary Powell saying yesterday this is an us versus them scenario. So the administration's language, not the usual diplomatic language. We are told very clearly the president is asking allies to crack down on terrorist cells, and he's asking nations a breakthrough possibly with Pakistan yesterday, promising cooperation, again after a very tough conversation, we are told, in which Secretary of State Colin Powell told the Pakistani leader, if you want good relations with the United States, you will support us now.
All right, John King, thanks so much for that update. We'll see you throughout the morning. Earlier, we were telling a little bit about the process that thousands of New York families are going through. In fact, families from all over the world trying to figure out whether their loved ones were trapped inside the building or if they were able to make it out. And right now, we're going to focus in on a family who is trying to figure out what happened to a firefighter. We do know that of the 400 or so firefighters who were immediately called to the scene, many of them are presumed to be dead. Kate Snow now traces the efforts of one family trying to figure out what has happened to their own.
Joseph Crowley is a congressman representing Queens and the Bronx, but he's also from a family of firefighters and police officers, a family missing one of their own. The congressman's cousin, New York Fire Battalion Chief John Moran.
John is a wonderful husband and the father of 2 small children, beautiful boys.
Duty put Moran at the World Trade Center Tuesday morning. His brother Michael called him. Terrorists had just flown a second plane into the South Tower. Michael told him to be careful. I know, I saw it, John told his brother. No one knows if he went inside. No one knows where he is now. The next day, the congressman toured the area. Someone constituents rely on for answers finds himself, like so many other Americans, helpless.
Under these circumstances, when you're talking about the magnitude of over 300 firefighters and police officers and emergency technicians who are lost, not to mention the tens, possibly hundreds and thousands of people that are missing right now, that doesn't matter who you are, and no one is exempt from the pain and the anguish of having to wait for that information.
Unlike other Americans, Crowley has the power to make law, his grief reinforcing his resolve.
I'm a pretty tolerant guy, but I have really strong feelings about the people who did this, and I haven't really, I don't think I've actually taken it all in yet, and I want something to be done.
John Moran was already a hero in Queens. On Father's Day, he helped fight a fire that killed 3 men. At that time, he told Dateline NBC, the firefighter performs one act of bravery in his career, and that's when he takes the oath of office. After that, everything else is in the line of duty.
My cousin John. That's all the firemen and firewomen and firefighters, police officers, all these people are very special people. We don't give them enough due. And you can multiply John Moran by 300 more people. There are heroes here that people will never know.
Kate Snow, CNN, Capitol Hill.
And to add to the misery of families like you just met, there is a call from the mayor of the city for family members to bring to a special center that has been set up downtown toothbrushes, hairbrushes, cigarette butts, anything that possibly could show DNA evidence so investors can ultimately match up remains with specific people and identifications. Right now, we're going to check in with Miles O'Brien, who joins us from the investigation desk in Atlanta. What's the very latest from there this morning, Miles?
Well, Paula, the first arrest. That's the big news. Authorities have made their first arrest in connection with Tuesday's attacks. The unidentified man was one of the people detained at New York's JFK Airport on Thursday. You'll recall our reporting about that. He is said to be a material witness to the investigation. And meanwhile, the Defense Department is looking into the possibility that two of the alleged terrorists in Tuesday's attacks may have attended schools run by the military, specifically the Defense Language Academy at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. Two others are in INS custody today on their way to New York. They were arrested on an Amtrak train in Texas and are said to be cooperative with authorities. They were arrested in the possession of box cutters and perhaps most ominously were on a flight from Newark to San Antonio on Tuesday morning. That flight had to be diverted to St. Louis when the FAA grounded all aircraft. And they are said to be helping out the investigation quite a bit. It raises the possibility that investigators have been repeating time and again that there is the possibility of many other terrorists in the U.S. perhaps ready to commit other acts. And one other note on the black boxes. Let's talk about that for just a moment. The black boxes in the World Trade Center crashes, the two aircraft that went into the World Trade Centers, all four of those, the two cockpit voice recorders, the two flight data recorders, have not been recovered. For obvious reasons, difficult to ascertain where they might be. But in the other two crashes, Pennsylvania and the Pentagon, the four black boxes have been found. In Pennsylvania, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder is said to be in good condition. At the Pentagon, the cockpit voice recorder was seriously damaged. It's unclear how much information investigators may be able to glean from it. Finally, on the investigation front, the government is calling its probe into the attacks PENT bomb. That's PENTTBOM. That stands for Pentagon Twin Towers Bomb. We'll keep you posted on all the latest developments. Let's send it now to Bill Hemmer on the streets of Manhattan. Bill?
Miles, thank you again. We're on Manhattan's west side, and this truly has to be a frustrating experience for so many right now. So many people have descended upon New York City trying to offer whatever help they can offer. The line here of volunteers goes clear down the block here and around, upwards of 1,000, possibly more than that, and it's only a bit past 7 o'clock in the morning here. If you come this way, you can see the line that continues up here to the convention center area. We were just told moments ago that the volunteers here, what are they saying? Excuse me. Let's talk with Sal and Brendan here. We were just given a word a moment ago that a number of volunteers will have no chance of getting in today. How you doing?
All right.
What did they tell you over there?
No more volunteers. They're just contracting out to work. It's going to be like a regular job now.
When did you guys get in line today?
We've been online. We were online for 4.5 hours yesterday, and we've been here since 5:30.
When you say they're going to contract to work,
there's
what does
four
that mean?
separate contractors that have the contract.
These are companies.
So we went over there, and there was a list. And if you're not on the list, you can't volunteer.
Yeah. Have you tried to get in earlier this week or not?
Yeah, yesterday we were here for 4 hours.
Did you get in then or not? You didn't. How do you feel today, not knowing that you'll be able to go?
Well, I'll tell you, the food and the water's great.
Got it.
It's
Hey,
nice.
Good luck today, man.
Okay.
Thanks a
All right,
lot.
guys,
Okay.
thanks.
We were talking earlier today with Anthony Pisano. I don't know if Anthony's still around here or not, but he was indicating that he was able to get in earlier this week. And basically, Anthony, you have a second? Sure. Come over a second here. We're live on CNN here. When you were in there, even though today has got to be somewhat frustrating not getting in, when you were in there, what were you able to do?
Yesterday, well, I'm an iron worker, but I didn't do iron worker things equivalent to an iron worker. But I did help the fire department. We moved boxes. We shift their locations from the lower floor in the World Financial Center to the upper deck,
You were
the
doing
mezzanine.
whatever you could, weren't you?
Anything they had to do. We moved equipment. We moved boxes. We moved debris.
Yeah.
It was raining outside, so they didn't allow people going outside. I seen it was dangerous, but they had the heavy equipment moving big stuff. Then they moved small. For getting closer to the building, they only had the fire department.
Yeah.
So they dug out the immediate, right next to the wreckage, right by the overpass that connected the World Financial Center to the World Trade Center.
Anthony, tell me this. You will not be able to get back in there today.
No.
Frustrating or not?
No, not for me, because there's other ways to help. There's other ways to volunteer. And from what I understand, from what I heard, the blood supply is plentiful. So everybody from 2 to 3 weeks from now, supply blood.
Are the
donate.
people in line here, Anthony, are they wasting their time at this point?
Without a doubt, they're wasting their time on this line.
There must be
unless
upwards
they're
of
police
1,000.
department, fire department, or anybody with a medical background to help in that aspect.
Okay.
You know, all civilian, from what I understand, from what I heard, all civilian volunteers, they don't need.
Got it.
And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing because it has to be under control. God forbid someone else gets hurt. You don't want the volunteers to get hurt.
Anthony, thank you. Best
No
of luck
problem.
to you.
My
Okay.
pleasure. Good luck.
We're also hearing from a number of firefighters who came in late last night from the state of Michigan. We've heard from people from Wisconsin, Arizona who have descended here on Manhattan. Also, a group of firefighters from France came in earlier this week. They too are trying to get closer to the site, which is many, many blocks south from where we are here. Now back to Washington and CNN's John King. John?
Thank you, Bill. Obviously, this is a defining time for the nation, a defining time as well for the president. Mr. Bush up in New York surveying the deepest of the devastation. Yesterday, we have an aerial photograph taken by a White House photographer showing the president as he was up there inspecting the damage near the World Trade Towers. I think we must be having a problem showing you that photo. Mr. Bush saying he was taken aback not only by the devastation. Here's the photo, the president looking down at the devastation from a helicopter. The president taken aback not only by the devastation, we are told, but also by the anger as he shook hands of the firefighters and other relief workers, many urging him to retaliate immediately. Now, while the president was up in New York, the Congress acting on a resolution authorizing him to use appropriate and necessary force to retaliate for this. It cleared the Senate unanimously. It cleared the House on a vote of 420 to 1. The dissenting voice, Democrat Barbara Lee of California, in a statement she said, September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This resolution will pass, although we all know that the president can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be, some of us must urge the use of restraint. I have agonized over this vote, Congressman Lee said, but I came to grips with opposing this resolution during the very painful memorial service today. As a member of the clergy so eloquently said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore. Now, Mr. Bush up at the Camp David presidential retreat this weekend, Vice President Dick Cheney with him as well. A National Security Council meeting later today. CNN is told by senior administration officials that in that discussion, the president will not only receive an update on the investigation and an update on the recovery efforts, but increasingly these discussions, we are told, turning to both immediate and long-term military options. A first-hand look at the worst of the devastation and a pep talk that included a promise to those pulling the dead from the rubble.
I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
After his emotional tour of New York, Mr. Bush was asked if he knew who was responsible.
We know we got a suspect.
But lead suspect Osama bin Laden is an elusive target, and aides say one of the president's greatest challenges is convincing an angry nation to be patient.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
Mr. Bush declared a national emergency and authorized a call-up of the National Guard and reservists. And Congress passed a resolution authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force to retaliate. Senior officials say they do not rule out a first wave of military strikes in the near future. But Mr. Bush is asking his national security team and other world leaders to develop a long-range plan. For example, sources tell CNN the president is asking the leaders of Canada, France, Germany, Britain, and other nations to do more to break up terrorist cells in their countries, and asking Saudi Arabia and other moderate Arab nations to crack down on bin Laden's financial supporters and to take a tougher line with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
In our response, we will have to take into account not only the perpetrators, but those who provide haven, support, inspiration, financial, and other assets to the perpetrators.
Mr. Bush also led the nation in a day of prayer and remembrance, with former presidents, the cabinet, and the Congress joining in.
Grief and tragedy and hatred are only for a time. Goodness, remembrance, and love have no end. And the Lord of life holds all who die and all who mourn.
Consoling the nation is another role for a president at times of crisis, and a father who knows the strains of the job well gave his son a supportive tap. We have a live picture for you now of the recovery effort still underway at the Pentagon. Obviously, you see there from this picture the devastation at the Pentagon, part of the building collapsing. One of the challenge for the relief and recovery workers, we are told, are continuing fears that additional parts of the building may collapse because of the damage caused when that plane struck the Pentagon back on Tuesday. Obviously, the U.S. Military Nerve Center there sustaining some significant damage. Now, as the president is up at Camp David this weekend, increasingly we are told discussing military options. I want to bring into our discussion here Colonel William Taylor, retired of the U.S. Army, a military analyst. He works for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Sir, one significant breakthrough, U.S. officials reporting to CNN yesterday saying that Pakistan has now promised to fully cooperate with any U.S. operations, including, we are told, use of its airspace if the United States requests to have U.S. warplanes go through Pakistani airspace. Pakistan, of course, borders Afghanistan, which is where Mr. bin Laden is given safe harbor. How significant could that be?
If the correct is accurate, it's very important. Not just the use of airspace, because Pakistan has a very long border with Afghanistan. Will they let us use their bases for staging areas if we need to put in ground troops as a military option? But you know, at this time of emotionalism, very cool heads have to prevail when you talk about military options. It doesn't do any good to say the United States has the best trained, best equipped troops in the world, which is probably true. We've heard our chairman of the Joint Chiefs say several times this year, our forces are underfunded, overstretched, our forces are frayed. Doesn't do any good to count 12 aircraft carrier battle groups or 10 ground divisions. You can't bring them all to bear at the same time. We have other threats around the world that we have to be prepared for. Don't forget that Saddam Hussein is still around and can cause damage. Do not forget the North Korean threat on the Korean Peninsula, and we could go on and on. So all our great forces will not be available. We need to think about this thing like a prize fight. Are we in for this thing for 15 rounds over 10 to 15 years? Is there a knockout punch? The terrorists won round one. Now military capability analysis has to start. That's complicated.
Well, let's start there. 1998, the bombing of the embassies in Africa. President Clinton responded, said that he was going to eradicate terrorism, launched cruise missiles against suspected bin Laden bases in Afghanistan. Mr. bin Laden obviously is still with us. As the president mulls his military options, ground troops necessary in your view?
They may be. The number one thing we've got to keep out there in the front is intelligence with a big I. When you talk about military options, we have got to be working carefully with the CIA, with the FBI, with the intelligence services of our friends and allies in NATO, maybe with President Musharraf of Pakistan, if he's willing to share intelligence. That's number one. This push to go kill somebody, do something, can be very wrong, like it was in 1998. Tomahawk cruise missiles against Afghanistan, they were ineffectual. Took out a bunch of tents. Fired Tomahawk cruise missiles at a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan because it was producing weapons of mass destruction. We found out later, no, it wasn't. It was a misguided operation with bad intelligence. We've got cool heads on the National Security Council. They're meeting now. We've got cool heads working in the Pentagon and the National Military Command Center. They're going around the clock, trying to tell the president what it takes, what kind of packages we can put together. And we probably shouldn't talk about military options. Probably ought to talk about national security options that brings all the elements together. And what we tell the president, a capability analysis is like a one-way train ticket. It's good for one time, one place only. And you have to look at time, situation, what allies we might have or not have, what intelligence we might or might not have. And we have to think about how many carrier battle groups might be involved under certain options. We've got 2 carrier battle groups right now. Fortunately, the USS Carl Vinson and the Enterprise in the Persian Gulf. We've got bases in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis going to continue to support us. All these things have to be considered But we've got good people working around the clock on this stuff right now.
Colonel Taylor, we need to stop there for time purposes. We'll continue to talk to you in the days and weeks ahead. Paula, now back to you in New York.
John, I know we have been commenting so much on that huge plume of smoke that continues to billow from what is left of the World Trade Center. I'm going to look over my shoulder right now and give you an idea.